In the lawless frontier town of Dead Horse Creek, fate works in mysterious ways. When Sarah Mae found a half-dead stranger collapsed in the muddy alley behind Murphy's Saloon, she had two choices: walk away like everyone else, or risk sharing her last crust of bread with a dying man. She didn't know her simple act of kindness would change, not just her life, but the destiny of an entire town. The stranger she saved wasn't just another drifter. He was Marcus, the Ghost, Rivers, the most feared lawman in the American West, a legend who'd brought down the notorious Carson Gang and ended the bloody Thompson County War single-handedly. But on that cold night, he was just a broken man in need of mercy, and she was just a saloon girl with a heart too big for her own good. This isn't just another Western tale. This is the story of how a saloon girl's compassion awakened a legend, and how that legend would return to save not just her, but an entire town from the iron grip of the most ruthless outlaws this side of the Mississippi. Some say kindness is weakness, but they've never seen what happens when mercy and justice join forces. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun cast long shadows through the dusty windows of Murphy's Saloon as Sarah Mae wiped down tables, her movements careful to avoid aggravating the bruise on her ribs, a gift from last night's rowdy customers. The floorboards creaked beneath her feet, each board as familiar as an old friend after 5 years of walking these same paths. "Girl, you're cleaning tables that ain't even dirty," Murphy called from behind the bar, his voice gruff but not unkind. The old barkeep had taken her in when she was barely 17, fresh from a failed marriage and desperate for any kind of work. "Them tables won't feed you. Get ready for tonight's crowd." Sarah tucked a strand of copper hair behind her ear, her green eyes reflecting in the grimy mirror behind the bar. At 22, she was already considered an old hand at Murphy's, outlasting most girls who came through Dead Horse Creek. The town had a way of either breaking people or turning them hard. Sarah had managed something different, keeping her. "Kindness while growing strong." "Got another letter from the bank," Murphy muttered, sliding an envelope across the bar. "Third one this month. Carson's boys are squeezing every business in town, using the bank to make it legal-like." Sarah picked up the letter, her fingers tracing the official letterhead. Ever since the Carson Gang had bought controlling interest in the town's only bank, they'd been slowly choking the life out of Dead Horse Creek. Legitimate businesses found their loans called in, while saloons and gambling houses owned by Carson's allies flourished. "We'll manage," Sarah said, though the words felt hollow. "We always do." The saloon's bat-wing doors creaked open, admitting Doc Wilson, his medical bag in hand. The old physician's face was grim. "Sarah, got a moment? Mrs. Peterson's asking for you. The baby's coming early." Sarah glanced at Murphy, who nodded. This was part of why she'd survived when others hadn't. She'd made herself useful beyond just serving drinks and looking pretty. She'd become something of an unofficial midwife, helping Doc Wilson with the town's women who couldn't afford proper medical care. "Take what you need from the kitchen," Murphy called as she grabbed her shawl. "God knows we've got more food than customers these days." The walk to the Peterson place took her past the town's empty storefronts, each one a testament to Carson's growing power. Where once Dead Horse Creek had been a bustling trade stop, now it was slowly dying. Only the saloons and brothels seemed to thrive, their garish lights a mockery of the town's former prosperity. Sarah's hand unconsciously went to the silver pendant around her neck, the only thing left behind by the mysterious drifter she'd helped 3 days ago. She hadn't told anyone about him, about how she'd found him half dead in the alley or shared her meager dinner. In Dead Horse Creek, kindness could be seen as weakness, and weakness was something she couldn't afford to show. The pendant was strange. Heavy silver worked into the shape of a star, but not like any lawman's badge she'd ever seen. The symbols around its edge were unfamiliar, and something about it felt important, though she couldn't say why. Mrs. Peterson's labor was difficult but successful. As Sarah helped clean the newborn girl, she found herself thinking about futures and possibilities. Dead Horse Creek wasn't a place for dreams, everyone said, but as she looked at the tiny life in her arms, she couldn't help but hope for something better. Night was falling by the time she returned to Murphy's. The saloon was starting to fill up, the usual crowd of miners, cowboys, and drifters seeking solace in whiskey and company. Sarah changed into her working clothes, a dress fine enough to attract attention, but practical enough to move in. She'd learned that balance years ago. Heard Carson himself might be coming to town. Jenny, one of the newer girls, whispered as they prepared for the evening. They say he's buying up more property, making plans for something big. Sarah's hand went to the pendant again. Something was changing in Dead Horse Creek. She could feel it in the air, like the electricity before a storm. That stranger she'd helped. There had been something about him, something in his eyes, that spoke of power and purpose. But such thoughts were dangerous. In Dead Horse Creek, you survived by keeping your head down and your hopes small. Sarah had learned that lesson the hard way. Still, as she moved through the crowded saloon that night, serving drinks and dodging wandering hands, she couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change. The pendant felt warm against her skin, like a promise waiting to be kept. The next morning brought trouble, wearing a clean suit and a banker's smile. James Carson Jr., son of the gang leader, stood in Murphy's saloon looking impossibly out of place among the rough-hewn tables and scarred bar top. His pocket watch glinted gold as he checked the time, making sure everyone noticed its worth. "Now, Mr. Murphy," Carson Jr. said, his cultured voice carrying across the empty saloon. "Surely we can come to some arrangement. My father's very reasonable when people show proper respect." Sarah pretended to clean glasses while listening, her hands shaking slightly. She'd seen Carson Jr.'s version of reasonable before. It usually ended with broken bones or burned businesses. Murphy stood his ground, shoulders squared despite his age. "Already told your father this place ain't for sale. Been here 20 years. Plan to be here 20 more. Carson Jr.'s smile never wavered. "Times change, old man. Dead Horse Creek is changing. Smart folks adapt." His eyes drifted to Sarah, lingering uncomfortably. "Shame if anything happened to your people. Pretty young thing like that could find herself in trouble." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Sarah felt the pendant grow warm against her skin, almost like a warning. "Miss Sarah's not part of this," Murphy growled, stepping between them. "Everything in Dead Horse Creek is part of this." Carson Jr. adjusted his cuffs, a gesture somehow more menacing than a drawn gun. "Father's planning big changes. Railroads coming through next spring. Town's either going to grow with us or—" He shrugged eloquently. After he left, Sarah found Murphy in his office, staring at a stack of papers. "Bank's calling in the loan," he said without looking up. "Got 3 days to pay or they take everything." "How much?" Sarah asked, though she already knew it would be impossible. $5,000. Murphy laughed bitterly. "Might as well be 5 million. Sarah thought of her savings, scraped together, over 5 years of hard work and careful living, nearly $800 hidden in a loose floorboard in her room, her escape fund meant for a fresh start somewhere far from Dead Horse Creek. "I've got some money," she started, but Murphy cut her off. "Don't even think it, girl. That's your future. Besides, won't make a difference. Carson's boys don't want money. They want control." That night, the saloon was quieter than usual. Word of Carson's visit had spread, and people were staying away, fearing trouble. Those who did come drank quietly, casting nervous glances at the door. "Heard what happened with Junior," Jenny said as they cleaned up. "Saw him visiting other businesses, too. Thompson's Mercantile, the blacksmith, even old Doc Wilson. They're tightening the noose. Sarah touched the pendant again, a habit she'd developed over the past few days. "There has to be something we can do." "In Dead Horse Creek," Jenny laughed. "Without humor. Only thing to do is leave while you can. Town's dying anyway, has been since the mines started drying up. In Carson's just finishing the job. But Sarah couldn't leave, not now. Murphy had given her a chance when no one else would. The town, for all its faults, was home. She thought of Mrs. Peterson's baby, of Doc Wilson's quiet dedication, of all the people who couldn't just pack up and leave. That night, she dreamed of the stranger she'd helped. In the dream, his eyes weren't desperate and hollow like when she'd found him, but burning with purpose. The pendant blazed like a star against her throat, and she heard words carried on dream winds. "Justice comes to those who keep faith." She woke to pounding on her door. Jenny burst in, face pale in the pre-dawn light. "Sarah, come quick. Someone's burned down Thompson's store. Old man Thompson. They say he didn't make it out." The morning air was thick with smoke and fear. Sarah stood with the crowd watching the smouldering ruins, hearing the whispers. Everyone knew Carson's boys had done it, but no one would say it aloud. This was how it started. How towns died, not just in body, but in spirit. The pendant felt like ice against her skin now. Sarah remembered the stranger's fevered words as she tended him. Sometimes mercy needs teeth, and justice needs hands. She hadn't understood then. Now, watching her town bow under the weight of fear, she was beginning to. Thompson's funeral drew the largest crowd Dead Horse Creek had seen in years. Sarah watched from the back of the gathering, noting who was present, and more importantly, who wasn't. Carson's men stayed away, but their absence felt deliberate. Like a message, see what happens to those who resist. "Never seen old Thompson look so peaceful," Doc Wilson muttered beside her. "Man fought in the war between the states, built this town with his bare hands, just to die in his nightshirt when they torched his life's work." Sarah's fingers found the pendant again. "Someone should do something." "Someone should," the doc agreed, his voice heavy with meaning. "Heard talk of a man who might. Stories floating down from up north. They say he ended the Thompson County War single-handed, brought down the whole Carson outfit in Willow Creek." Sarah's heart skipped. The Carson Gang had holdings in Willow Creek. Had being the word. Place is free now. Man they called the Ghost saw to that. Some say he can't be killed. Others say he's justice incarnate. Doc Wilson shrugged. Course, those are just stories. But Sarah's mind was racing. The stranger she'd helped, his fever-ravaged mumblings about Willow Creek, the scars she'd seen while tending his wounds, that strange silver pendant he'd left behind. Her thoughts were interrupted by the arrival of James Carson himself. Unlike his son's polished appearance, the elder Carson dressed like what he was, a ruthless man who'd clawed his way to power. He rode a massive black horse through town, flanked by 6 hard-looking men. The crowd parted before them like water. Carson dismounted smoothly, despite his age, and approached the gathering. "Come to pay my respects," he announced, loud enough for all to hear. "Tragic accident, burning to death in one's own store. Shows how careful we all need to be." Sarah felt sick at the performance. Carson laid a wreath on Thompson's grave, then turned to address the crowd. "Dead Horse Creek's changing, friends. Railroad's coming, progress is coming. Old ways—" He glanced meaningfully at the fresh grave. "Got to make way for new. But change don't have to hurt, not if folks are smart about it." His eyes swept the gathering, lingering on each business owner. "I'm offering fair prices for properties. Today only. Tomorrow?" He shrugged. "Well, accidents happen." Sarah watched faces in the crowd. Some showed fear, others resignation. A few burned with helpless anger, but none showed defiance. Dead Horse Creek was breaking. That evening, Murphy's was packed, people drinking to forget, to gather courage, or just because they didn't know what else to do. Sarah moved through the crowd, hearing fragments of conversation. Selling to Carson tomorrow. Can't fight progress. And heard about Willow Creek. Just stories. Near midnight, one of Carson's men started trouble. Sarah saw it coming. They always started the same way. A dropped drink, an accusation, a shove. Within minutes, chairs were flying. Enough! Murphy's voice boomed across the saloon. He stood behind the bar, shotgun raised. The fighting stopped instantly, not from Murphy's threat, but because everyone saw Carson Jr. entering through the batwing doors. Now, Jr. said, that banker's smile in place. Just high spirits, no need for violence. He surveyed the damage with obvious satisfaction. Though property damage like this could affect your insurance, lucky for you, we're still accepting offers. Sarah felt something change inside her. The pendant burned against her skin as she watched Murphy's shoulders slump. This was how it happened. Not with gunfights at high noon, but with paperwork and accidents and 1,000 small surrenders. She thought of the stranger she'd helped. How broken he'd seemed that night. But there had been something else in him too, a core of steel beneath the weakness. He'd left the pendant for a reason. Left it with her. Late that night, after the saloon closed, Sarah made a decision. In her small room above the saloon, she pried up the loose floorboard and took out her savings. $800 wouldn't save the town, but maybe it could buy time. Time for what? She touched the pendant, remembering Doc's words about the ghost. A sound from outside drew her to the window. Riders were coming into town, a lot of them. Carson's men carrying torches. The time for waiting was over. Torchlight cast savage shadows on the streets of Dead Horse Creek as Carson's men surrounded Murphy's saloon. Sarah counted at least 20 riders, more than she'd ever seen the gang bring to town at once. The pendant at her throat felt like ice against her skin, a warning of the violence to come. "Get everyone upstairs," Murphy ordered, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. Back rooms, away from the windows. But before they could move, the batwing doors burst open. James. Carson strode in, flanked by his son and 4 hard-faced men carrying coal oil cans. The gang leader looked different tonight. Gone was the pretense of civilization, replaced by naked malice. "Time's up, Murphy," Carson announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the saloon. "Town's changing tonight. Either you change with it, or—" He gestured to the coal oil cans. Sarah felt Jenny trembling beside her as Carson's men began spreading out through the saloon. The few remaining customers pressed themselves against the walls, trying to become invisible. Murphy stood his ground, behind the bar, but Sarah could see his hands shaking. "This is my place," Murphy said, but his voice lacked conviction. 20 years. 20 years of holding back progress, Carson Jr. cut in smoothly. 20 years of defying the natural order. That ends tonight. Sarah watched in horror as the men began dousing the saloon's walls with coal oil. The sharp smell filled the air, making her eyes water. But something else was happening, too. The pendant against her skin was growing warmer, almost humming with energy. "Wait," she heard herself say, stepping forward. "I have money. $800. Take it. Give us more time." Carson's laugh was like breaking glass. "Hear that, boys? The saloon girl wants to negotiate." His eyes raked over her appraisingly. "Though maybe we could work something out. Pretty thing like you could be useful in my establishments. Might even let old Murphy here keep his place, under new management, of course." The pendant burned now, and with it came a surge of something Sarah had never felt before. Pure, righteous anger. "I've seen what happens to girls in your establishments, Carson. Seen them carried to Doc Wilson broken and used up. I'd rather burn." A dangerous silence fell. Carson's smile vanished. "That can be arranged." "You don't want to do this," Sarah continued, her voice stronger than she felt. "You don't want to make him angry?" "Him?" Carson Jr. stepped forward. "Who's going to be angry? The law?" He laughed. "We own the law." Sarah's hand went to the pendant. "The ghost! The man who ended your operation in Willow Creek. He's coming." The change in the room was instant. Carson's men shifted uneasily, and for just a moment she saw fear flash across the gang leader's face. But then his expression hardened. "Willow Creek was a mistake," he snarled. "One that won't be repeated. And if that ghost of yours is real, he can watch this place burn, with the rest of you inside it." He turned to his men. "Lock them in, all of them. Let's show Dead Horse Creek what happens to people who believe in ghosts instead of progress." Everything happened at once. Murphy reached for his shotgun, but took a pistol butt to the head before he could raise it. Jenny screamed as rough hands grabbed her. Sarah felt herself being shoved toward the back room, along with the other girls and remaining customers. "You have 1 hour," Carson announced, as his men barricaded the doors. 1 hour to think about your choices. Then the coal oil meets a match, and Dead Horse Creek gets its message about crossing the Carson Gang. Through the windows, Sarah could see more of Carson's men surrounding the building, ensuring no one could escape. The town watched from darkened windows, doors firmly shut against the night's evil. But something was happening. The pendant wasn't just warm now. It was pulsing like a heartbeat against her skin. And in the distance, barely audible over the sound of fear and desperate prayers, came the rhythm of approaching hoofbeats. Sarah touched the silver star, remembering the stranger's fevered words from that night. "Justice comes when mercy calls." She hadn't understood then, but now, as the hoofbeats grew closer and the pendant burned with otherworldly energy, she realized she hadn't just saved a dying man that night. She'd awakened a legend. Carson's voice carried through the barricaded door. 55 minutes, folks. Better make peace with whatever God you believe in." Sarah stood in the darkness, surrounded by the fearful whispers of the trapped and desperate. But for the first time that night, she smiled, because she knew something Carson didn't. The God of justice was already here, and he wore a silver star. The coal oil fumes made breathing difficult as Sarah helped Murphy to his feet, blood trickling from where Carson's men had struck him. Outside, torchlight danced like demons' eyes, while Carson's men waited to burn them alive. 45 minutes remained. "The back wall," Murphy whispered, touching his bleeding head. "Behind the storage shelves. There's a reason I never fixed those loose boards." Hope flickered in Sarah's chest. A way out? Maybe. For some, it's tight, leads to the alley, but Carson's men will be watching. Murphy's eyes swept the room, counting. 23 people, can't all escape that way without being seen. Sarah's mind raced. The pendant's warmth spread through her body, bringing clarity with it. "We don't all need to escape, we just need to get help." Jenny, who'd been listening, stepped forward. "I'm the smallest. I can squeeze through, run for Doc Wilson's." "No," Sarah said, touching the pendant. "I need to go. The ghost, he'll be looking for this." She pulled the silver star from her neck. "But first, we need a distraction," Murphy nodded grimly. "Got some bottles of Carson's favorite whiskey. Shame to waste them, but—" He managed a weak smile. "Always wanted to show him what I thought of his rot gut." Working quickly, they fashioned makeshift weapons. Sarah tore strips from her petticoat for wicks, while others carefully poured whiskey into bottles. The irony wasn't lost on her, using Carson's own liquor to fight back. "Ladies and gentlemen," Carson's voice boomed from outside, 40 minutes until your decision is due. Though I must say, smoke and whiskey make for a fine combination," laughter from his men, but Sarah noticed something else. The hoofbeats she'd heard earlier were gone. The night had gone strangely quiet, like the calm before a storm. Now, Sarah, whispered. Murphy hurled the first bottle through a front window. It exploded against a hitching post, spraying burning whiskey. Carson's men scattered, cursing. More bottles followed, creating chaos in the street. "Shoot anyone who tries to run," Carson bellowed, but his men were busy dodging flames and broken glass. Sarah slipped behind the storage shelves, finding the loose boards Murphy had described. The opening was tiny, barely big enough for her slim frame. As she wiggled through, splinters tearing at her dress, she heard more crashes and shouts from inside. The alley was dark, but she knew every shadow from years of working at Murphy's. She pressed herself against the rough wall, heart pounding, 20 feet to the corner, then another 100 to Doc Wilson's, if she could make it unseen. A shot rang out, followed by breaking glass. Someone inside screamed, "Find who's throwing!" "And those bottles!" Carson's voice carried clearly. "And someone check the back!" Sarah ran. Her bare feet made little sound on the dirt, but every step felt like thunder in her ears. Behind her, boots scraped on wooden planks. Someone was in the alley. "Got movement," a voice called. "Back here!" She dove behind a water trough as bullets splintered the wood above her head. The pendant seemed to pulse against her palm, urging her forward. More shots, but they seemed to be coming from different directions now. Confusion spread among Carsons. "Men, watch the roofs," someone shouted. "He's up there." Sarah didn't wait to see who he was. She sprinted the last distance to Doc Wilson's back door, pounding frantically. The door opened immediately. They'd been watching, waiting. "Child," Doc Wilson pulled her inside. "Thought you were dead in there." "No time," Sarah gasped. "Murphy and the others. Carson's going to burn them alive. We need help." A familiar voice finished. Sarah spun. There in Doc Wilson's shadowy kitchen stood the stranger she'd saved, but transformed. Gone was the desperate, dying man she'd found in the alley. In his place stood something out of legend, tall and terrible in the darkness. He wore a long black duster, gun belt slung low, and his eyes burned with the same energy she felt in the pendant. "You came back," she whispered. "You showed mercy," he replied, voice like distant thunder. "Now justice answers." He held out his hand, and Sarah placed the pendant in it. The silver star seemed to ignite at his touch, casting strange shadows on the walls. "Carson has 20 men," she said. A smile crossed the stranger's face, but it held no warmth. Carson had 40 men in Willow Creek. Had. More gunfire erupted outside, but different now, measured, precise. The chaos of Carson's men gave way to shouts of alarm. "Been busy while you kept them distracted," the stranger said. "Carson's about to learn why they call me Ghost. No one ever sees where the bullets come from." He moved to the door, then paused. "Stay here. You've done your part." "No." Sarah surprised herself with her own conviction. "Those are my people in there, my home. I'm helping." The stranger studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "You already proved you're brave. Now prove you're smart. Follow my lead exactly. Doc, got that medical bag ready? Something tells me you'll be busy tonight." Doc Wilson patted his bag. "Been ready since I heard Carson was coming. Some folks need to learn. Mercy's got teeth too." The stranger, the ghost, checked his guns with practiced ease. "That it does, Doc, that it does." He turned to Sarah. "Ready to help me remind Carson why he should fear the dark?" Sarah thought of Murphy, of Jenny, of all the people trapped in the saloon. Thought of Thompson, burned alive in his store. The pendant's energy seemed to linger in her body, turning fear into resolve. "Ready," she said. Outside, the night erupted into war. The night air crackled with gunfire as Sarah followed the ghost through Dead Horse Creek's shadowy back alleys. He moved like his namesake, silent and fluid, while more shots rang out from seemingly impossible directions. "Your friend's been busy," Sarah whispered, noting bullet holes in walls where none of Carson's men stood. "Not friends," the ghost replied, checking around a corner. "Just echoes. Old trick I learned in the war. Set up percussion caps with slow-burning fuses. Makes them think they're surrounded." "Aren't they?" His smile was cold in the darkness. "They will be." Carson's voice boomed from the street. 20 minutes, then we light it up, ghost or no ghost." The ghost touched the silver pendant now pinned to his duster. "First rule of hunting snakes, make them strike where you want." He handed Sarah a small mirror. "Remember how to signal like I showed you?" She nodded, thinking of the quick lesson. In Doc's kitchen, 2 flashes meant danger, 1 meant clear, 3 meant move now. "Good. Get to the water tower. When you see my signal, start the fire." The fire! Sarah's eyes widened as she realized. The coal oil they brought, best weapons the one your enemy brings to the fight. He touched her shoulder briefly. "You saved my life with kindness. Now let me save your town with justice." Sarah crept toward the water tower, while the ghost seemed to melt into the shadows. The streets had grown strangely quiet, except for the occasional pop of a percussion cap, keeping Carson's men jumping at ghosts. From her elevated position, Sarah could see the whole scene. Carson's men had spread out, trying to cover every approach to the saloon, but they were nervous, shooting at shadows. 3 already lay groaning in the dirt, taken down by shots that seemed to come from nowhere. "Find him!" Carson Jr. shouted, his cultured voice cracking with fear. "He's just one man!" A shot rang out and Junior's hat went flying. Another shot and the gun was knocked from his hand. One man was enough in Willow Creek. The ghost's voice seemed to come from everywhere at once. "One man's enough here." Sarah saw the signal, a quick flash of silver in the darkness. She angled her mirror, reflecting the moonlight. 1 flash. Clear. The ghost's voice carried again. "Carson, remember what I told you in Willow Creek about how fire cleanses? Burn the saloon!" Carson screamed. "Burn it now!" His men rushed forward with torches, exactly as the ghost had predicted. But as they approached the coal oil-soaked walls, Sarah saw the trap. Water was seeping out from under the saloon's foundation, washing away the fuel, carrying it down the slight grade of the street. Right toward where most of Carson's men were standing, the ghost's shot was like thunder in the quiet night. His bullet struck a torch dropped by one of his earlier victims, still burning in a puddle of diluted coal oil. The street erupted in flames. Carson's men found themselves standing in fire that seemed to chase them, following the trails of fuel that had spread beneath their feet. Their own coal oil, meant to burn the saloon, now cut off their escape routes. "Murphy!" The ghost's voice carried through the chaos. "Back doors clear! Now!" The saloon's back door burst open, and hostages began pouring out. Murphy had them ready, just as planned. Sarah watched them flee through the alleys, while Carson's men were distracted by the flames. "Kill them," Carson ordered, but his men were too busy saving themselves from the fire that seemed to have a mind of its own, herding them like cattle. The ghost appeared in the middle of the street, a dark figure wreathed in flames. "Time to settle accounts. Carson, just like Willow Creek." "Take him!" Carson screamed, but his men's nerve was breaking. They'd come to burn out helpless townspeople, not face a legend. "Remember what I promised?" The ghost's voice carried over the crackling flames. "Said, if you ever threatened innocent people again, I'd make you watch while your empire burned." More shots rang out, precise, devastating. Gun belts were shot away, knees taken out with surgical accuracy. Not killing shots, but deliberately crippling ones. 20 men, Carson, the ghost continued, advancing through the flames like they couldn't touch him. "Just like you had 20 minutes. Time's up." Sarah watched in awe as the ghost seemed to be everywhere at once, moving through his own carefully crafted chaos like a dancer. Carson's men fell one by one, disarmed or disabled by shots that seemed impossible. "He's not human," one of Carson's. Men screamed, throwing down his gun and running. Others followed, fleeing into the night. Carson and his son found themselves alone, backing away from the approaching figure. "Willow Creek was just the beginning," the ghost said. You're done here, Carson. The law's coming, real law. They'll find enough evidence in your saddlebags to hang you 10 times over. Kill him, Carson Jr. screamed at his father. Kill him! But James Carson, terror of Dead Horse Creek, scourge of 3 territories, did something no one had ever seen. He ran. Dawn broke over Dead Horse Creek, painting the aftermath in shades of grey and gold. The street outside Murphy's still smouldered, coal oil burns scarring the dirt. Doc Wilson moved among the wounded, mostly Carson's men, their injuries precise and deliberate. No killing shots, just carefully placed bullets that ensured they wouldn't hold a gun again anytime soon. Never seen anything like it, Murphy said, watching the ghost check Carson's abandoned saddlebags. Man moved like a shadow, shot like lightning. Reminded me of stories my granddaddy used to tell about avenging angels. Sarah helped Jenny tend to the few townspeople with minor injuries, but her eyes kept returning to the mysterious figure who'd transformed their desperate last stand into victory. In the morning light, she could see him clearly for the first time, tall, weathered, with eyes that had seen too much and refused to look away. Found what I needed, the ghost announced, holding up papers from Carson's bags. Bank transfers, property deeds, death orders, enough to hang him and half the corrupt officials in 3 territories. Carson'll be back, Junior spat from where he sat nursing a shattered knee. Father's got friends, powerful friends. This ain't over. No, the ghost agreed, crouching before the younger Carson. It's not. That's why I left you alive, to deliver a message. Tell your father what happened here. Tell him what's coming. Every town he's terrorized, every life he's ruined, I'm going to take it all back, just like Willow Creek, just like here. You're just one man, Junior sneered, but fear cracked his voice. Am I? The ghost stood, and Sarah noticed how the townspeople unconsciously drew closer to him, like moths to a flame. Look around, boy. See these people? Yesterday they were victims. Today they fought back. Tomorrow. He let the threat hang. Sarah approached as Junior was led away to the jail. The papers you found, they'll really help? Territory Marshal's been building a case against Carson for years. This is the evidence he needed. But the ghost's expression darkened. Junior's right about one thing. Carson's got friends. Rich. Men, corrupt judges, bought lawmen. Won't go down easy. Then why let them go? Could have ended it here. The ghost touched the silver pendant. Because this isn't just about Carson. It's about something bigger. People need to see that men like him can be fought, can be beaten. A commotion down the street drew their attention. Riders were approaching. Not Carson's men, but townspeople returning. Word had spread about the night's events, bringing folks back who'd fled Carson's terror. Thompson's widow, Sarah whispered, recognizing the first rider. And the McCullers. The Petersons. The ghost watched them come, something like satisfaction in his eyes. See, hope's a powerful thing, more powerful than bullets sometimes. But Sarah saw something else too, faces in windows quickly drawing back, people hurrying past with averted eyes. Not everyone's happy. Some worked with Carson, informed for him. They'll be scared now. Good. The ghost checked his guns with practiced ease. Fears changing sides, as it should. Doc Wilson approached, wiping blood from his hands. Riders coming from the south too. Law by the look of them. Real law. The ghost nodded. Marshal Hayes, good man. He'll handle things proper, help the town rebuild right. He turned to Sarah, which means it's time for me to go. Go? Sarah felt something clench in her chest. But Carson's still out there, his friends. And I'll find them. Town by town, territory by territory. Men like Carson cast long shadows. Time to let some light in. He touched the pendant again. Unless you want this back, Sarah shook her head. It was never mine. Just keeping it safe for you. Like you kept me safe? His eyes held hers. Kindness and justice, mercy and vengeance, two sides of the same. A coin. Maybe that's why the pendant chose you. Will you? Sarah hesitated. Will you come back? Carson will, which means so will I. He mounted his horse, a dark stallion that seemed to appear from nowhere. Keep watching the dawn, Sarah Mae. Justice rides with the morning light. As he rode out, Sarah heard whispers spreading through the growing crowd. The ghost, the legend, the man who'd brought hope back to Dead Horse Creek. But she remembered him differently. A broken man she'd found in an alley, saved with nothing but kindness and a crust of bread. It's not over, Murphy said beside her, watching the horizon. Carson's friends won't like what happened here. They'll come looking. Sarah touched her throat where the pendant had rested. Its warmth lingered, like a promise. Let them come, she said softly. The dawn always follows the darkness. Always. 3 days passed like a fever dream in Dead Horse Creek. Marshal Hayes and his deputies took charge, sorting through Carson's abandoned documents, taking statements, restoring order. But Sarah felt the undercurrent of tension. Saw it in the way people still jumped at sudden noises, how they hurried inside at dusk. Found another one, Jenny said, sliding a note across the bar. Sarah unfolded it carefully. More threats, this time against Murphy's family back east. That made 5. In 3 days, Carson's friends making themselves known. Murphy growled, pouring drinks with hands that shook slightly. Judge Matthews suddenly can't hear our case. Bank's talking about reviewing all its loans, legitimate ones too, and 3 merchants who were going to testify changed their minds this morning. Sarah watched the street through Murphy's windows, remembering the ghost's words about Carson's connections. The victory had been real, but now came the harder fight, against money, influence, and the kind of power that worked in daylight wearing respectable faces. "Riders coming," someone called from outside. Everyone tensed, but it was just the afternoon stage, arriving early for once. Sarah noticed how Marshal Hayes's deputies moved to casual but strategic positions, hands near guns. The stage brought mail, including a letter that made Murphy's face go pale. "Court order," he said quietly. "Emergency hearing about the saloon's ownership. Tomorrow morning in Carson City." "That's 50 miles away," Sarah protested. They expect us not to show," Murphy cut in. "Which means they'll rule in favor of whoever bought Carson's claim to the property, probably one of his legitimate business friends." Thunder rolled suddenly, making everyone jump. Storm coming, but the air felt wrong, too heavy, too still. Sarah's hand went to her throat, missing the pendant's familiar warmth. The batwing doors swung open, admitting a tall figure in a rain-spattered duster. For a moment Sarah's heart leaped, but it was just another traveler. Until he spoke. Her Dead Horse Creek had some excitement. The voice was cultured, smooth as silk. Shame about Carson. Man always paid his legal fees on time. Sarah felt the change in the room, the way Marshal Hayes straightened, how Murphy's hands tightened on his shotgun under the bar. This was no ordinary traveler, Judge Ashworth, Hayes said carefully. "Long way from your courthouse, just passing through." The judge smiled, but it never reached his eyes. "Thought I'd see this ghost everyone's talking about, man who thinks he's above the law." Above corrupt law, maybe. The new voice made everyone turn. There in the doorway stood the ghost, silver pendant gleaming against his black duster. Sarah hadn't heard him enter, hadn't seen where he came from. He was simply there, like a shadow taking form. "Vigilante justice has no place in civilized society," Ashworth said, but Sarah saw fear crack through his composed facade. "Good thing. Dead Horse Creek ain't civilized then." The ghost moved into the room like flowing water, not with judges taking bribes to ignore murder, not with lawmen bought cheaper than the bullets in their guns. "You dare?" "Found your name in Carson's papers, Judge, along with some interesting numbers. Be shame if those papers found their way to the territorial governor." Ashworth's face went from red to white. You're interfering with forces you don't understand. Carson's just one piece. There are others, powerful men who believe in progress, in civilization's march forward. Civilization? The ghost's laugh was cold as mountain wind. Is that what you call burning men alive in their stores, threatening women, stealing homes through corrupt courts? Thunder crashed again, closer now. Through the windows, Sarah saw storm clouds rolling in, dark as judgment. Last chance, Judge, the ghost continued. Ride out. Take word to your powerful friends. Tell them what you saw here. Tell them what's coming. You're just one man, Ashworth repeated Junior's words. From days ago, the ghost touched his pendant, and Sarah gasped as silver light seemed to ripple through the room. Am I? Look closer, Judge. See the truth that Carson learned. Every person in this room, they're not afraid anymore. And people without fear. He smiled, terrible and beautiful. They start asking questions, start looking at ledgers, start remembering. What really happened to their neighbors, their friends? Ashworth backed toward the door. This isn't over. No, the ghost agreed. It's just beginning. Civilization is coming to the frontier, Judge. Real civilization. Justice that can't be bought. Law that serves more than the powerful. His voice dropped lower. And judgment for men who forgot the difference between law and justice. The judge fled into the gathering storm. Only then did Sarah notice she'd been holding her breath. He'll bring others, Hayes warned. Count on it. The ghost turned to Murphy. Got a fast horse out back. Court order says property owner has to appear. Doesn't say which owner. Murphy blinked. You mean... Found something interesting in Carson's papers. Deed to this place was never properly transferred from the original owner, man named Marcus Rivers. The ghost's eyes glinted. My real name. Before I became a ghost. Sarah felt pieces clicking into place. Why he'd come back to this particular town. Why he'd been so familiar with its layout. You owned Murphy's, she whispered. Still do, legally. Sold it to Murphy here off the books when I took up other work. Carson's attempt to seize it through the bank? Invalid. Always was. He handed Murphy a sheaf of papers. Which means I can appear in court tomorrow as the legitimate owner. Let Judge Ashworth explain to his friends how he plans to steal property from a man who died at Shiloh, according to official records. Sarah saw it then. The layers of his plan, how deep the game went. He wasn't just fighting Carson's men with guns. He was using their own system against them, turning their bureaucracy into a weapon. Storm's getting closer, Hayes observed. The ghost nodded. Good. We ride better in the dark. The storm broke over Dead Horse Creek like God's own fury. Sarah stood at Murphy's window, watching lightning split the sky. Somewhere out there, the ghost, Marcus Rivers, rode toward Carson City, carrying hope and danger in equal measure. I should know the truth, Doc Wilson said softly beside her. About him, about this place. Sarah turned. The old doctor's face was grave in the lamplight, and she noticed for the first time how his hand unconsciously touched an old army surgeon's badge on his vest. You knew him. Before knew him. Doc's laugh was bittersweet. Girl, I saved his life at Shiloh, or thought I did. Regiment found him 3 days later, half dead but still fighting. That's when the stories started. The soldier death couldn't touch. The ghost who walked out of his own grave. Thunder crashed, and Sarah felt the pendant's absence like a physical ache. But how did he come here? To Dead Horse Creek? Town needed an owner after the war. Someone to build something good. Marcus, he had dreams bigger than battlefields. Built this place with blood and hope, made it a haven for folks looking to start fresh. Doc's eyes went distant. Then Carson came, started small. Just business, he said, progress. By the time we saw the rot, it was too late. So Marcus left, became the ghost. Had to. Carson's reach was too long, his friends too powerful. Marcus knew the only way to fight men like that was to become something they couldn't touch, a legend, a nightmare that followed them into the dark. Sarah absorbed this, pieces falling into place. The pendant? Cavalry unit's badge, melted down with silver from his captain's stars. Story goes he had it blessed by a Navajo medicine man, made into something between a badge and a talisman. Marks him as justice's hand in dark places. Lightning illuminated the street, and Sarah caught glimpses of movement. Marshal Hayes's men, positioning themselves on rooftops, watching approaches to town. They were expecting trouble. "Riders!" The call came from the telegraph office. "Coming fast from the north!" Sarah counted 8 horsemen emerging from the storm, led by a figure. She recognized James Carson himself, returned with what looked like professional gunmen. "Right on time," Doc muttered, checking his medical bag. "Marcus said they'd come tonight, try to take back the town before that court hearing tomorrow." "But the ghost isn't here." Sarah felt fear twist in her gut. Doc smiled grimly. "Isn't he?" The storm riders dismounted at the saloon's hitching post, water streaming from their slickers. Carson's face was a mask of rage as he strode through the bat-wing doors. "Where is he?" Carson demanded, water pooling at his feet. "Where's this ghost of yours?" Lightning flashed, and suddenly the ghost was there, standing at the top of the stairs, as if he'd been there all along. The pendant gleamed like captured lightning against his chest. "Looking for me, Carson?" Several guns cleared leather, but the ghost didn't move. "Might want to rethink that. Marshal Hayes has some fine sharpshooters on the roof. Doc Wilson's got enough experience treating gunshot wounds. But dead men can't testify tomorrow, can they?" Carson's laugh was ugly. "Tomorrow? There won't be a town here tomorrow. Burn it all," he shouted to his men. "Every building. Show them what happens to—" His voice died as the ghost drew his gun. The movement was too fast to follow, like lightning made flesh. Carson's gun went flying, his hand bleeding. "Figured you'd try this," the ghost said conversationally. "That's why I'm not really here." "What?" Carson clutched his bleeding hand. "In Carson City already. Been there since yesterday. What you're seeing?" The ghost smiled. Just a ghost. Lightning flashed again, thunder booming, and he was gone. Carson's men spun wildly, shooting at shadows. But there he was again, by the bar. Then the window, then the stairs, everywhere and nowhere. "It's a trick!" Carson screamed. "He can't be in 2 places." "Can't I?" The ghost's voice seemed to come from every corner. "You never did understand, Carson. I'm not just a man. I'm what happens when good people have had enough. When mercy gets tired. When justice needs hands." Sarah watched in awe as the ghost seemed to multiply with each lightning flash, appearing and disappearing, herding Carson's men into a tight group. She remembered Doc's words about legends and nightmares. Marshal Hayes's deputies appeared in doorways, rifles raised. "Drop them," Hayes called from the street. "Or find out if ghosts can stop bullets better than flesh and blood." Carson's men, professionals though they were, broke. Guns clattered to the floor. Only Carson himself remained defiant. "You're still just a man," he snarled at the ghost, who now stood solid before him. "Bleed like any other." "Maybe." The ghost touched his pendant. "Care to test that theory?" Instead, Carson ran, fleeing into the storm that seemed to swallow him whole. His men surrendered quietly after that. "How?" Sarah asked Doc later, after Hayes's deputies had taken the prisoners away. "How was he here, and in Carson City?" Doc's eyes twinkled. "Who says he was? Sometimes the best weapon against men like Carson isn't a gun or a badge. It's what they believe. Fear's a powerful thing, especially fear of what you can't explain." Sarah thought about the ghost's appearances, the lightning, the pendant's glow. Then it was all just? Doc raised an eyebrow. "Girl, ain't nothing just about a legend coming to life. Sometimes the difference between a man and a ghost is what people believe, and tonight they believed. Outside, the storm began to fade, leaving behind a cleaned world and 8 more prisoners for Hayes to question. Somewhere on the road to Carson City, Sarah knew, justice was riding through the night, wearing a silver star that had once been her pendant. She touched her throat, remembering its warmth, and smiled. Sometimes the greatest power wasn't in what was real or unreal, but in what people were ready to believe in. Tonight, Dead Horse Creek had chosen to believe in ghosts. Tomorrow, they'd believe in justice. Word spread through Dead Horse Creek like wildfire. The ghost had won in Carson City. Judge Ashworth's carefully orchestrated hearing fell apart when Marcus Rivers' legitimate property claims emerged, backed by territorial records, even Carson's. Corrupt officials couldn't dispute. Should have seen their faces, Murphy chuckled, reading the telegram for the 4th time. All those high and mighty lawyers scrambling when he walked in, bold as brass, with papers proving he died at Shiloh. But Sarah noted the worry lines around his eyes. What aren't you telling us? Carson's allies. Murphy hesitated. They're powerful folk. Railroad barons, mining companies, men who buy senators like others buy cattle. They're calling in favors, sending telegrams. This isn't just about one town anymore. As if confirming his words, more riders arrived. Not gunmen this time, but men in expensive suits carrying leather portfolios. They moved through town like locusts, examining property deeds, discussing railroad routes, making offers that sounded generous but carried steel beneath the silk. Progress, they called it, speaking of development and civilization. But Sarah saw how they marked which properties to pressure first, which owners might be vulnerable. Carson's methods with more sophistication, violence wrapped in law and contracts. They're trying to do legally what Carson couldn't do with guns, Doc Wilson observed, watching another group of surveyors measure Main Street, buying up the town, piece by piece, using money instead of bullets. Sarah helped Jenny serve drinks to the newcomers, listening to their conversations. Words like eminent domain and corporate acquisition, mixed with whispered threats about accidents and misfortune. The ghost can't fight this, Jenny whispered. Can't shoot a banknote or outdraw a lawyer. But Sarah remembered how the ghost had turned Carson's own methods against him. Maybe he doesn't have to fight. Maybe we do, our way. She gathered townspeople in ones and twos, sharing what she'd overheard. Thompson's widow refused to sell her store's lease. The blacksmith suddenly remembered old mining claims that complicated railroad surveys. Doc Wilson found health code violations that required extensive inspections. Small resistance, but it spread. Every property sale meant paperwork. Every development required permits. Every transaction faced delays and complications. The sophisticated men in suits found themselves tangled in the very bureaucracy they usually wielded as a weapon. Smart, Marshal Hayes commented, watching another frustrated surveyor team pack up. Fighting fire with fire. But victory had a price. Accidents began happening again. Shops vandalized, horses spooked, merchandise damaged. More subtle than Carson's brutality, but the message was clear. Then came the evening Sarah found Jenny crying in the storeroom. They visited my sister in Mesa City, Jenny sobbed. Said it would be shame if her children got sick. Asked if she'd ever considered how many accidents could happen at a schoolhouse. Sarah felt cold fury rise. This wasn't justice or progress. It was Carson's evil wearing a respectable face. She was still standing there, fists clenched when she felt it, warmth at her throat, like a remembered kiss. The ghost stepped from the shadows, silver pendant gleaming. They think they're being clever, he said softly. Using my own tactics. Law and fear instead of guns. Can you stop them? Sarah asked. Already have. His smile was dangerous. While they were here trying to buy the town, I was visiting their offices in Carson City. Amazing what you find in private files. Proof. Of bribes, records of threats, lists of crimes done in progress's name. Evidence being delivered to honest judges and newspaper editors as we speak. Men like that fear exposure more than bullets. By morning, they'll have more pressing concerns than one small town. But Sarah saw tension in his stance. There's more, isn't there? Carson's gone to ground. His friends are calling in real muscle, not just gunmen, but professionals, men who hunt ghosts for a living. He touched the pendant. War's coming, Sarah, bigger than Dead Horse Creek. Question is, are these people ready? Sarah thought of Jenny's tears, of Thompson's burning store, of all the small cruelties done in civilization's name. They're ready. We're ready. The ghost studied her for a long moment. Might have given you more than a pendant that night. Might have given you a curse, drawing you into this fight. No curse, Sarah said firmly. A choice. My choice. Lightning flickered in the distance, though. The sky was clear. The pendant seemed to pulse with its own light. Storm's coming, the ghost said softly. Not just rain this time. Blood and thunder, justice and vengeance. Last chance to walk away. Sarah straightened her spine. Already told you, this is my home, our home. We'll face the storm together. He nodded slowly. Then let's give them something to fear, something bigger than one ghost. Show them what happens when a whole town decides to haunt those who destroy it. Outside, more riders were approaching, hard men with hard eyes, coming to hunt a legend. But Sarah smiled, feeling the town's resolve harden like steel in fire. Let them come. Dead Horse Creek had learned that the strongest weapons weren't guns or money, but belief and unity. They'd fought Carson's brutality and won. They'd fought corrupt law and won. Now they'd show these new enemies what happened when you pushed good people too far. Show them why even ghosts chose this town to haunt. The storm was coming, and this time they'd meet it standing together. The truth arrived with the morning stage, a single newspaper from Carson City that shattered everything. Sarah stared at the headline, her world crumbling. Ghost of Shiloh exposed. Marcus Rivers alive, working for railroad interest. Below was a photograph that couldn't be denied. The ghost, their legend, their savior, shaking hands with railroad executives 3 years ago. The article detailed his role as a territory reclamation specialist, hired to clear troublesome and towns through elaborate deceptions. It's all here, Murphy said, voice hollow as he read. The pendant's a prop, blessed by a paid actor. The ghost appearances done with flash powder and mirrors. Even Willow Creek, he didn't save it, he helped. Break it. Town's a railroad depot now, Jenny burst in, face streaked with tears. The bank's calling in every loan. Railroads already started construction at the north end. They're saying we have no legal right to stop them, that all our delays were based on fraudulent claims by a railroad agent. Sarah felt physically ill, every moment, every word, every seeming act of justice. Had it all been theater? A professional manipulation to make the town surrender willingly instead of fighting? Sarah. Doc Wilson's voice was gentle. There's more. That night you found him in the alley. It was staged, Hayes said from the doorway, his marshal's badge catching the morning light. Carson confirmed it when we caught him an hour ago. The ghost, or whatever his real name is, planned it all. Knew your reputation for helping people, used it to gain the town's trust. Even that pendant was planted for you to find. The pendant. Sarah remembered its warmth, the way it seemed to pulse with power. All tricks, all lies. But Carson's men, she protested weakly. The shots, the fire, blanks and careful choreography, Hayes answered. Carson was in on it from the start. His defeat here meant the railroad could come in looking like saviors, offering to protect the town from his return. Classic con game. Create a problem, then sell the solution. Sarah moved through the saloon in a daze, touching tables where the ghost had stood, remembering words that now poisoned her heart. The town was falling apart around her, people packing, selling for whatever they could get, running from shame as much as defeat. "Think about it," Murphy said bitterly. "Every victory pushed us exactly where they wanted. Fighting Carson made us vulnerable to the railroad. Resisting the lawyers drained our resources. Even our unity played into their hands, made us all invest in the same lie." Marshal Hayes's deputies were arresting the surveyors now, not for their railroad connections, but because they'd been part of the con. The same men would be back tomorrow, wearing different suits, holding legal papers instead of false identities. "Town meeting in an hour," Hayes announced. "Railroads offering final settlements." After that, he didn't need to finish. They all knew what happened to towns that refused progress. Sarah climbed the stairs to her room, each step heavy as lead. She'd been so proud of helping him that night, so sure she'd seen something special in his eyes. Instead, she'd been the key to breaking. Her own town spirit, a glint of silver caught her eye. There on her pillow lay the pendant, and beside it a letter in familiar handwriting. Her hands shook as she read, "Sarah, by now you know the truth, or what they want you to think is truth. But ask yourself, if I'm really working for the railroad, why warn you? Why give you this chance? The newspaper's real, the photo's real. Everything they're saying about my past is real. What they don't know is why I turned against the railroad. What I saw them do to towns like Dead Horse Creek. How many lives they destroyed in progress's name. Carson City's evidence against the railroad is real too. By the time you read this, it will be in the hands of every honest newspaper and judge in the territory. The pendant is real. My death at Shiloh was real. What happened after? That's a story for another time. Tonight at midnight, everything changes. Trust the warmth. Trust your heart. The railroad didn't send me to destroy Dead Horse Creek. I came to help you save it." The pendant lay in her palm, and for the first time since reading the newspaper, she felt its warmth again. Real or fake, truth or lie, she had a choice to make. Trust her heart or trust the evidence. Believe in ghosts or accept the rational world's verdict? Outside, she heard the town meeting bell begin to toll. Time to choose, not just for her, but for Dead Horse Creek's soul. The pendant pulsed once, like a heartbeat, and Sarah made her decision. The town meeting became a funeral for hope. Sarah stood at the back of the crowded church, pendant hidden in her pocket, watching her neighbors surrender one by one. Railroad men moved through the crowd like undertakers, collecting signatures, offering generous compensation for homes and businesses about to be demolished. "Progress requires sacrifice," their spokesman said smoothly. "But the railroad remembers its friends. Those who sign today get premium prices. Those who wait." His smile was Carson's smile, wearing a better suit. Murphy sat slumped in the front. Pew, the fight gone from him. Doc Wilson stared at his old army surgeon's badge like it held answers. Even Marshal Hayes looked defeated, watching his jurisdiction dissolve into corporate territory. "What about the ghost?" someone shouted. "He'll stop this." The railroad man's laugh was carefully rehearsed. "Your ghost is probably in the next territory by now, running the same con on some other dying town. Men like that, they feed on hope, sell you back your own dreams. But we're offering something real, security, future, civilization." Sarah felt the pendant grow warm. Not a trick, not this time. This warmth came from rage, her own. She'd been a fool, yes, but not the way they thought. Not for believing in justice, but for waiting for someone else to deliver it. She stepped forward. "Civilization." Her voice carried in the sudden quiet. "Is that what you call stealing homes through rigged courts? Breaking spirits instead of bodies? Carson used torches and guns. You use papers and lies. Same evil wearing a clean collar." "Young woman," the spokesman's tone was condescending. "Clearly this has been emotional." "Damn right it's emotional!" Sarah's fury broke free. "This is our home. These papers, these claims, they're just Carson's threats made legal. The ghost fooled us, maybe, but he showed us something true, showed us we could fight back. Against what? The spokesman demanded. Progress? The future? Against men who think they can buy our souls along with our land. Sarah pulled out the pendant, held it high. Silver light caught the church's stained glass, casting strange shadows. You want to build your railroad? Fine, but you'll build it dealing with us fair. No more tricks, no more pressure, and you'll compensate every person in this town what their property's really worth. Laughter started but died as others stood. First Jenny, then Doc Wilson, then more. Sarah saw it spreading through the crowd like dawn breaking. Not hope this time, but something stronger. Determination. You're making a mistake, the spokesman warned. Don't let one girl's hysteria— Ain't hysteria, Murphy interrupted, standing straighter. It's clarity. Ghost fooled us about him, sure. But Sarah's right. He showed us our own strength, showed us what happens when good people stand together. You'll be ruined, the railroad man snapped. All of you. We have power you can't imagine. You now? Marshal Hayes stepped forward, telegram in hand. Just got word from the territorial capital. Seems someone's been sharing evidence of railroad corruption with every newspaper from here to St. Louis. Stocks already dropping. Investors asking ugly questions. The spokesman's face went pale. Impossible. Those files were locked in. A ghost's hands are hard to stop, Sarah said quietly. Ain't that right, Marcus? The ghost stepped from the church's shadows, real as sin and twice as dangerous. Told you I'd help you save it, he said softly. Never said how. Chaos erupted. Railroad men went for hidden guns but found themselves facing Marshal Hayes's deputies and a dozen angry townspeople. The spokesman tried to run but stopped short. Every exit had a ghost in it, silver pendant gleaming. One man can't be in all those places, he stammered. One man, no. The ghost, the real one, moved to Sarah's side. But a legend, a story people believe in, that can be everywhere. You tried to use my past against me, forgot the most important part of that past, which is, I really did die at Shiloh. The ghost's smile was terrible and beautiful. Everything since then? Just justice finding its hands? Sarah felt the pendant pulse like a heart coming alive. The railroad men saw it too, saw silver light dance across determined faces, saw their own tricks and lies turned back on them. Outside, thunder rolled across a cloudless sky. Dead Horse Creek was about to teach the railroad a lesson about real progress, real civilization, and about the power of ghosts made flesh by belief. Night settled over Dead Horse Creek like a held breath. Sarah moved through Murphy's Saloon, now transformed into a fortress, watching final preparations. Every window had become a firing position, every doorway a choke point. But it was the faces that struck her most, determined, focused, alive with purpose. You should rest, the ghost said softly, finding her at the bar. Dawn's coming fast. Can't sleep, she admitted. Keep thinking about that night I found you. How different everything was then. Different. His smile was gentle. Or just hidden. The strength you're showing now, it was always there. In you, in this town. Sometimes people just need a reminder of who they really are. Thunder rolled again in the cloudless sky. Through the windows, Sarah watched townspeople moving in the darkness, setting final traps, checking positions, sharing quiet words of courage. They're not just fighting for property anymore, she realized. This is about something bigger. Always. Was? The ghost touched his pendant, matching the one at her throat. Carson, the railroad, they're not just stealing land. They're stealing dignity, hope, the right to stand up and say no to men with money and guns. Marshal Hayes approached, his badge catching lamplight. Scouts report Carson's men are camped. 3 miles out. At least 60 guns, maybe more. They've got cannon, 2 brass 12-pounders. Expected that. The ghost nodded. They'll use them to break our barricades, try to scatter our defense. Can we stop them? Already have. His smile turned predatory. Sent some friends to visit their camp tonight. Amazing how much damage a few tools can do to cannon wheels. They'll figure it out eventually, but by then... The newspapers, Sarah, understood. The evidence of corruption will have spread. Progress cuts both ways, the ghost agreed. Telegraph makes it harder to bury truth, but we have to hold till then. Hold and show others it can be done. Doc Wilson joined them. Medical. Bag ready. Got every cellar and strong room prepared for wounded. Women and children are safe in the mine tunnels. Town's as ready as it can be. Sarah felt the weight of it all. Not just the coming battle, but what it meant. Dead Horse Creek wasn't just fighting for itself anymore. It was becoming a symbol, a story that would spread across territories. You don't have to stay, the ghost told her quietly. You've done enough. More than enough. Try to make me leave, she challenged. This is my home, my fight. Maybe even more than yours. He studied her for a long moment, then unfastened his gun belt. Then you'll need this. I don't know how. Yes, you do. He helped her buckle it on. Same way you know how to serve drinks, deliver babies, give hope to the hopeless. It's about taking care of your own. The weapon should have felt foreign, but instead it settled naturally like the pendant. At her throat, both symbols of something deeper, the responsibility of standing up, of fighting back. Murphy called everyone together for a final meeting. Maps were studied, positions confirmed, signals arranged. Through it all, Sarah felt a strange calm settling. Over her, the fear wasn't gone, but it had transformed into something useful, like steel being forged. They'll come from the north, the ghost explained, following the railroad survey route, trying to make a point. First lights in 4 hours, get what rest you can. People dispersed to their positions, but Sarah noticed something else. How they touched the walls as they passed, as if saying goodbye to the old saloon, or hello to what it was becoming, a symbol of resistance, a story that would be told in other threatened towns. Sarah. The ghost's voice stopped her as she headed upstairs. Whatever happens tomorrow, what you did, showing mercy to a stranger, it didn't just save my life, it saved my soul. She touched her pendant, felt its warmth match the one he wore. Mercy and justice, she said softly, 2 sides of the same coin. Get some rest, he repeated. Dawn's coming. But they both knew sleep would be impossible. Something was building in the air, in the ground, in their bones. The pendants pulsed like heartbeats, counting down to morning. Dead Horse Creek had started as just another dying town. Now it was becoming legend. Tomorrow would determine what kind, a story of defeat or a rallying cry for every place where good people had been pushed too far. Dawn was coming, and with it, ghosts would ride. Dead Horse Creek transformed in the hours after the church meeting. Barricades rose at strategic points, guided by the ghost's expertise, but built by townspeople's hands. Murphy's Saloon became a command center, its long bar covered in maps and telegrams. Carson's coming, the ghost announced, marking positions on the map. Railroads hired him and his whole gang as private security, giving him a chance at revenge while keeping their own hands clean. How many? Marshal Hayes studied the marked approaches to town. 60 men, professional gun hands from 4 territories. They'll hit at dawn, trying to take the town before those newspaper stories about railroad corruption can spread further. Sarah watched more reports arrive by telegraph, other towns rising up, inspired by Dead Horse Creek's stand. The railroad stock was plummeting as investors learned the truth about their methods. They're desperate now, the ghost continued, makes them dangerous. This isn't just about one town anymore, it's about their whole operation. If we win here, other towns will fight back. the whole house of cards collapses. So they'll try to make an example of us, Doc Wilson said grimly, checking his medical supplies. Show what happens to folks who resist progress. Jenny burst in, breathless from running. Riders spotted on the North Road. Not Carson's men. Looks like Thompson's boys. And the McCullers. And half the families that ran last week. They're coming back to fight. Sarah felt the pendant pulse warmly as more riders arrived. Not just locals, but faces she didn't recognize. Hard men with haunted eyes, carrying guns and badges from other territories. Friends of yours, she asked the ghost. Men who fought injustice elsewhere. Some I helped, some just heard what's happening here. Railroads got enemies everywhere. Now those enemies have a rallying point. Murphy was organizing supplies, his voice stronger than it had been in days. Ammunitions distributed, food and water stored. Medical stations set up in the basement. Got everyone who can't fight moved to safe locations. What about the railroad? Men we captured? Hayes asked. Locked in the bank vault. The ghost's smile was cold. Seems fitting. Left them paper and ink. They can write confessions while they wait. Might save their lives when this is over. Sarah saw the change in the town. Not just physical preparations, but something deeper. People walked straighter, spoke clearer. Fear had been replaced by purpose. They'll still come, Hayes warned. Carson's men, probably reinforced by corporate. Good men. They've got the numbers. Numbers don't matter, the ghost said softly. Not against belief, not against justice. He turned to Sarah. You showed them that. Showed me too. I still don't understand, she admitted. The newspaper, the railroad connection, and how much was true. All of it. I did work for them, did help break towns. Each time told myself it was progress, civilization, until Willow Creek. His eyes went distant. Watched a woman like you try to save her home. Watched her die trying. Something broke in me that day. Or maybe something healed. The man who died. At Shiloh finally remembered what he'd fought for. The pendant seemed to shimmer as he spoke, and Sarah understood suddenly. It wasn't magic. Not really. It was purpose, belief, the weight of justice made physical. Carson's men will come in waves, the ghost continued, addressing the growing crowd. First wave tests our defenses, second hits where they think we're weak, third wave's the hammer. Everything they've got trying to break us through sheer force. And our plan? Someone asked. Let them come. Let them spend their strength against walls built by belief. Let them learn what happens when good people stand together. He touched, his pendant matching the one at Sarah's throat. They think they're fighting one ghost? Show them a whole town of them. As if in answer, thunder rolled across the cloudless sky. The air felt charged, heavy with purpose. Sarah looked at faces around her. Farmers, merchants, saloon girls, all transformed by conviction into something stronger than any hired gun. Dawn's coming, Hayes announced. Carson's men will arrive with it. Sarah felt the pendant's warmth spread through her chest. Then let's give them a proper Dead Horse Creek. Welcome. Outside, more riders were arriving, not running from the coming storm, but riding toward it. Somewhere out there, Carson gathered his army of mercenaries and killers. But here, in this small frontier town, something more powerful was assembling. Justice was finding its hands. Mercy was growing teeth, and ghosts were preparing for war. Dawn broke over Dead Horse Creek like judgment, painting the sky in shades of fire and blood. Sarah stood at Murphy's upper window, watching Carson's army emerge from the morning mist. Riders stretched across the horizon, their weapons glinting in the early light. Count 68 guns, the ghost said beside her. Carson in front, railroad men in back staying clean, exactly as expected. The pendant at Sarah's throat burned warm as Carson's voice boomed across the silent town. Last chance. Surrender now. We'll let you leave with your lives. Fight and we burn it all. No one responded. Dead Horse Creek waited, every window and doorway harboring defenders, every shadow potentially hiding a ghost. They're expecting us to break, the ghost observed. Expecting fear. His smile was cold. Let's show them what this town's really Made of. The first wave came hard and fast, 20 riders charging straight down Main Street, confident in their numbers and firepower. They hit the first barrier at full gallop, and that's when Dead Horse Creek revealed its teeth. Hidden ropes, snapped tight, horses went down, and precise fire from a dozen windows dropped riders before they could clear leather. The few who made it through found themselves in a deadly crossfire, every angle covered, every retreat blocked. "Fall back!" Carson screamed, watching half his first wave go down in seconds. "Pull back and regroup!" "Second wave coming," Sarah warned, seeing riders spread out for a wider attack. "They're trying to flank." Thunder cracked from a cloudless sky. Both pendants flared with silver light, and suddenly the ghost was everywhere, on the roof, in the street, emerging from alleys. Each figure identical, each moving with the same deadly grace. "Impossible," one of Carson's men screamed. "How many are there?" "As many as justice needs." The ghost's voice seemed to come from every direction. "As many as mercy demands." Sarah understood now. The town itself was fighting back, every shadow and corner remembering what it meant to stand against evil. The pendants weren't magic. They were focus points for something deeper, the power of belief, of righteous anger, of good people saying, "Enough." Carson's men faltered, superstition warring with greed. But their leader's voice whipped them forward. "They're just tricks, mirrors and smoke, burn it all." The second wave hit harder than the first, attacking from 3 directions. But Dead Horse Creek was ready. Jenny and her girls dropped coal oil barrels from rooftops, creating walls of fire that split the attackers. Thompson's widow and her sons commanded the south barricade, their rage over their father's murder making every shot count. Sarah moved through it all like a ghost herself, directing defenders, calling out warnings, her borrowed gun speaking only when necessary. The pendant's warmth spread through her whole body, connecting her to every part of the fight. "They're bringing up the cannon," someone shouted. "Let them waste time." The ghost appeared beside Sarah, real and solid, despite his doubles still fighting. Across town. By the time they figure out the sabotage, multiple riders appeared on the ridge, but these weren't Carson's men. Marshal Hayes' voice carried clearly, "Territory Marshal, throw down your weapons." But Carson was too far gone, too invested in rage and revenge. "Kill them all," he screamed, and the final wave began, everything he had left thrown at the town in one desperate assault. What followed would be talked about for generations. Dead Horse Creek became a storm of gunfire and courage, every citizen fighting for more than property now, fighting for the right to stand against tyranny, to say no to men who thought money could buy anything. The ghost was everywhere and nowhere. His legend made real by belief. Sarah felt the pendant's power flow through the whole town, turning ordinary people into heroes. Jenny dropping a rattlesnake flag on charging riders. Murphy's shotgun speaking from impossible angles. Doc Wilson calmly tending wounded under fire while quoting scripture about judgment. Carson himself led the push toward Murphy's, determined to destroy the heart of resistance. He never saw the real threat until too late. Sarah herself, standing, in plain sight on the saloon's porch. "You're just a saloon girl," he snarled, raising his gun. "What do you think you can do?" Sarah felt the pendant pulse like a second heart. "Show you what happens when you push good people too far." Her shot took his gun hand, just as the ghost had taught her. The second took his horse out from under him. As Carson hit the dirt, the impossible happened. His men began surrendering, not to the ghost, not to Hayes's marshals, but to Sarah and the townspeople, ordinary citizens who'd found extraordinary courage. The battle wasn't over. Pockets of resistance remained, railroad men trying to salvage something from their collapsing scheme. But the tide had turned, not just in Dead Horse Creek, but across the frontier. The legend was spreading, carried by telegraph and testimony, not just about the ghost now, but about a town that stood up, that turned enough into action. Justice had found its hands, mercy had grown teeth, and ghosts rode with the morning light. The morning sun climbed higher over Dead Horse Creek, revealing the full scope of battle. Carson lay in the dust, clutching his shattered hand, while his remaining men threw down their weapons. But at the edge of town, the railroad executives had one last card to play. "Burn the evidence," their leader shouted to his personal guards. "Get to the bank vault. None of those papers can survive." Sarah's voice cut through the chaos. "You still don't understand. It's not about the papers anymore." She stood in the middle of Main Street, pendant blazing like a star. Around her, townspeople emerged from their positions, not running or hiding, but walking proud. The ghost materialized beside her, solid and real, his matching pendant pulsing with shared purpose. "Tell them, Carson," Sarah commanded. "Tell them what you learned today." Carson looked up, blood dripping from his ruined hand, and something broke in him. "It's true," he gasped. "Everything they said about progress, about civilization. It was all lies. We weren't building, we were destroying, and they—" He pointed at the railroad men with his good hand. "They knew, planned it all." "The papers are already gone," the ghost added quietly. "Sent to every newspaper and honest judge in 3 territories. But the real story, that's here, in what these people did. The railroad executives tried to run, but found themselves facing not just Marshal Hayes's deputies, but a wall of townspeople, armed not just with guns now, but with something more powerful, righteous certainty. You can't fight progress," the railroad leader shouted desperately. "This is progress," Sarah replied. "Real progress. People standing together, justice finding its way. The frontier becoming what it was meant to be, not just a place to take, but a place to build something true." Thunder rolled one final time across the cloudless sky. Both pendants flared with impossible light, and for a moment everyone saw it. The ghosts of Dead Horse Creek, not just the ghost himself, but the spirits of everyone who'd ever fought for justice on the frontier. They stood with the townspeople, an army of light against the dying dark. The railroad men fell to their knees, their weapons dropping forgotten. Around them, Carson's surviving mercenaries were surrendering to Hayes's deputies, many looking relieved. To be free of their corrupt masters. "It's done," the ghost said softly, but Sarah shook her head. "Not quite." She walked to Carson, still bleeding in the dirt. "You killed Thompson, threatened our homes, thought you could break us with fear." She raised her gun, and everyone held their breath. "But Dead Horse Creek doesn't break. We learn, we grow, we become stronger." The shot cracked like judgment and hit the dirt beside Carson's head. "That's mercy," she said quietly. "Not because you deserve it, but because we choose it. Remember that in prison." The ghost's smile was fierce with pride. "Mercy and justice," he said, "two sides of the same coin." As Hayes's men began taking prisoners, Sarah felt the pendant's warmth spread through the whole town. Not magic, but something better. The power of people discovering their own strength, their own capacity for courage. The railroad men were led away in chains, their empire of corruption crumbling as more telegrams arrived. Other towns rising up, other communities, finding their voice. Dead Horse Creek had become more than a battlefield. It was a symbol now, a story that would be told wherever people needed hope. "Will you stay?" Sarah asked the ghost as the sun reached its peak. He touched his pendant, looking at the town he'd once owned, once abandoned, and now helped save. "Some ghosts need to keep riding," he said softly. "Keep finding places where justice needs hands." "And some ghosts," Sarah replied, her own pendant glowing, "need to remember they're also men. Men who deserve peace." Around them, Dead Horse Creek was already beginning to rebuild, its people transformed not just by victory, but by the discovery of their own power. They didn't need a ghost anymore. They had become something stronger, a community that would never again bow to tyranny, never again forget its own strength. The ghost, Marcus Rivers, looked at Sarah for a long moment. Then he smiled, and it was a human smile, full of warmth and hope. "Maybe," he said, "it's time some ghosts came home." 1 month after the battle, Dead Horse Creek had changed so much that travelers sometimes rode past without recognizing it. The town had a new name now, Justice Springs, though old-timers still used both names, each carrying its own kind of pride. The railroad came through anyway, but on the town's terms. The new station was built where the community wanted it, with fair prices paid for every piece of land. More importantly, the railroad learned to fear something more potent than guns or money, the power of ordinary people standing together. Sarah still wore the pendant, though its supernatural warmth had faded to a gentle reminder. She didn't need magic anymore. The real power had always been in choices, in standing up, in showing mercy without forgetting justice. Murphy's Saloon became Murphy and Rivers, with Marcus settling into a different kind of legend, one of quiet, strength and steady purpose. The ghost still rode when needed, but less often now. Some battles needed fighting, but others needed something subtler, the example of a community that had learned to protect its own. "Got another letter," Sarah said one evening, showing Marcus the envelope. "Third town this month asking how we did it." He smiled, touching his own pendant. "Tell them the truth. About mercy finding steel, about justice finding hands, about ordinary people becoming extraordinary just by standing together." Outside, Dead Horse Creek was growing, not just in size, but in spirit. Every new building, every new business carried the memory of their victory. The town had become living proof that progress didn't have to mean destruction, that civilization could be built on courage instead of corruption. "Think we'll need ghosts again?" Sarah asked, watching the sunset paint the street gold. Marcus took her hand, their pendants glowing softly in the fading light. "There will always be men like Carson, like those railroad barons, always be battles worth fighting. But now they'll think twice before pushing good people too far. Stories spread, legends grow, and sometimes," he smiled, "the best kind of ghost is the memory of ordinary folks who decided enough was enough. The sun set on Justice Springs, on its new life and old pride. Somewhere out in the darkness, other towns faced their own battles, their own choices between fear and courage. But now they had a story to light their way, about a saloon girl's mercy, a ghost's redemption, and the kind of justice that blooms when good people stand together. Some say on quiet nights, you can still hear thunder in cloudless skies over Justice Springs, still see silver light flickering in dark places, but the town doesn't need those reminders anymore. They have something better. They have each other, and that's the greatest power of all.